So I'm Veronica, and I run Groundwork Gallery, and the room is full of wonderful friends. Thank you all so much for coming. We're going to have a great couple of days. Our theme is extraction, or was right at the beginning, and it all started with an American program where a whole big group of artists and academics got exercised about what was known as the Berkeley Pit, which was a skyscraper-sized pit of poisoned residue from a copper mine. And it was just left unprotected. And there'll be some stories from other places over the next couple of days of other unprotected bits of poison. But they started a huge program, an artistic program. And my friend Karen, who lives around the corner from here, knew them all, or knew the people running it, and said, you must get involved. So I did, and it turned out Groundwork Gallery was the only outlier, and everyone else was in the States. So this happened initially 2020, so we were the only people, and I have carried it on. And the other starting point was with the Norfolk Coast Partnership. I was involved with and asked them, what are the extraction issues here? And they said, quarrying. So that's where we started our first year. We thought about quarrying. And then we went on and much widened our focus with the help of many people who are also in this room who've been advising us, taking us on walks. So there have been artists in residence associated with this program for 4 years now, steadily increasing numbers. So this year there were 20 people, and this is the first of 2 conferences we're going to have that arose from this last year. And so you'll hear from everyone, and I won't say any more about that, and people will introduce each other as they go along. There are 4 sessions covering 4 themes. You've got the program, I hope, everybody. And the idea is to have some discussion between us and to kind of, I don't know where we'll end up, and we never know where we'll end up. But let's hope we'll end up somewhere really positive. And so I wasn't going to, in fact, I was going to start with what's on the screen, but I'm going to end with what's on the screen, because that, well, I was one of the big worries was lunch, and so I did some cooking for lunch, and so did lots of other people. So what you're going to get is a motley assemblage of hopefully delicious things. But while I was making lunch, my son was up in the roof at our house because there'd been a lot of squirrel thunking in the night, and the squirrels had cut off electricity, so we were out of electricity, and also they'd knocked off a roof tile, so there was a big hole, and they were scampering about. So he went up to see what was going on, and what did he see but this enormous collection of ladybirds in lots of little nests hibernating up there. And who knew? I mean, that's just seemed such an extraordinary find, and there they all are nestling. And it really made me think again that we have to pay attention to what's under our nose or above our heads or close to us, because you never know who's going to appear and who's going to thrive. And I didn't know, so I'm going to find out about ladybirds. And Bug Life are soon going to join Groundwork Network, so they will all help us. And next time we have a conference, I'm sure they'll be involved too. So we'll learn. Oh, there's also a wasp nest. I was slightly less enthusiastic about that. Anyway, our theme last year was the ground beneath our feet. This time it was ground up, which actually curiously produced a more political result. And I suppose that just that slight change of wording. So that's another lesson learnt. So I'm going to stop talking now, and we're going to go into our first session. And we're delighted that Charlie Gardner is joining us. Charlie is an activist with Extinction Rebellion, but also he's an academic, and also he's an ecologist, much travelled around the world, and very much aware of politics, involved with legal issues and everything. So over to you, Charlie.
Thanks so much, Veronica, and I'm thrilled to be here. It's such a wonderful honour to be with such a creative and fascinating group of people. So Veronica's asked me to speak about the politics of climate change and where we are now. As you'll all be aware, we've had this political target to keep within 1.5 degrees of heating. It's been our target since the early 90s. Globally, we agreed on that when I was 13 years old. But a few months ago, we went a full year of being above 1.5 degrees. So we've passed that target. We missed it. We're not going to stick to it. And obviously, that's a key moment for reflection, because that indicates a very clear political failure, but also, I think, a failure in our approaches as informed citizens, as mission-driven people that want to make the world a better place. We've allowed this to happen. So we need to reflect on our approaches too. So we're at 1.5. What does that mean? It doesn't sound like a lot, but we've seen what's happened in Spain. We've seen fires around the world. We've seen mind-boggling storms. And it's having impacts here too. So 2 years ago, we had a 40-degree heat wave that it came as a shock to the scientists that were trying to predict how soon that would happen. And it had major impacts. So you could have stood on a roof in King's Lynn and seen half a dozen fires that day. There were 300 wildfires in Norfolk alone that day. I never thought I'd see the day when wildfires were a genuine issue that I had to have on my radar in Norfolk, but that day is here at 1.5 degrees. About 10 miles up the coast there, on the banks of the Wash, there's a village called Heacham. Heacham is protected by a shingle ridge, but the winter storms are getting more ferocious every year. So it's costing more and more money to keep this ridge intact. Every year, the council and the Environment Agency, they send out the bulldozers to beef up the ridge again. But the cost of that has gone from £80,000 a year to £1 million a year. And the council and the Environment Agency, they can't afford it. So they're going through a process at the moment of re-evaluating their policy. Up till now, they've had a hold the front line policy. We will maintain this land. We will not allow the sea in. But they're re-evaluating that now. Can we afford to keep the sea out? Should they decide to, they will stop funding it. We'll lose that land. A caravan park will be lost. Part of the Wild Ken Hill estate where BBC Springwatch is filmed will be lost. We've also had incredible rainfall. So, if any of you take the train down from Lynn to Cambridge, if you've done that over the last year, passing through Britain's agricultural heartland, where 1/3 of our Grade 1 agricultural land is, you'll have seen just big brown circles in all the fields, which, they'd been on the water for half the year. They couldn't be planted. The tractors couldn't get in there. So this is happening already. Round the Norfolk coast in Haysborough and Hemsby, people's houses are falling into the sea. People were told that it would be decades before their houses would fall into the sea, but this is Europe's fastest eroding coastline, and they are losing their homes now. We have climate refugees in this country now. And yet we still talk about acting on climate change for our grandchildren. It's really bizarre. So how hot's it going to get? Well, under current policies, it's going to reach about 2.7 degrees by the end of this century. So one of the things we talk about, one of the issues when we talk about climate change is we talk about the future, these abstract dates, the end of the century, 2050, 2070. They sound, they sound so abstract we can't imagine them. So could you all please consider a young person, a young loved one in your life, and consider how old they might be in 2050, what they might be doing in 2070. I think of my niece Alba, she's 3. When we talk about, the end of this century, all things being equal, she should be alive then. But the world will not be as we know it. So, we can't imagine what a world that's 2.7 degrees hotter or 3 degrees hotter will be like because there has never, there haven't been human beings in such a world. It's hundreds of millions of years since the world has been that hot. We can predict some impacts. So here, sea level rise will be a big issue. Some of you may know, last year I walked for 15 days. I walked from Cambridge, 4 days up to King's Lynn, another 7 or 8 days or so across the North Norfolk coast, and another 4 days through the Norfolk Broads. I walked from Cambridge to Norwich, 180 miles, entirely on land that will not be land anymore within my niece Alba's lifetime. I don't believe this building will be here within Alba's lifetime. Unless we change, I do not believe that King's Lynn will still be a town, really. So this is not an abstract future problem. It's a very, very real one. In terms of other impacts we can expect to see with a 2-degree world, there was a shocking study came out 2 years ago looking at the climatic conditions that allow people to thrive. And it turns out that we simply cannot survive in places which have a mean annual temperature of above 29 degrees. Well, when you look at the places that will have a mean annual temperature above 29 degrees by 2070, not by 2100, but by 2070, when Alba's 48 or something, basically the entire tropics will be uninhabitable to human beings. Places that are currently home to 3 billion people will be uninhabitable. I'm an ecologist, and what really worries me is what a 3-degree rise will do to ecosystems. And of course, ecosystems have adapted to climate change in the past, but it's happening so fast now that that's just not going to happen. We pretty much know for a fact there will be no coral reefs in a 3-degree world, and that's not just about the pretty fishes and the octopus. 500 million people depend on fish from coral reefs as their primary source of protein. Personally, I cannot conceive of there being such a thing as forests in a 3-degree world, which is why I've switched from being a conservation scientist to a climate activist. How can we conserve endangered species if there are no forests? The big threat, the really big concern, is that organized human society will not be able to adapt to these changes in time. In other words, civilization will collapse. So this is the situation we find ourselves in now. We are knowingly, with full knowledge, moving towards a situation where society is likely, I use the word likely, to collapse within the lifetimes of people already alive, within the lifetimes of our young loved ones. So how on earth has this happened? Right, well, firstly, before we talk about that, I just want to make clear that when we talk about these future impacts, this future sea level rise, future collapse of ecosystems, none of this is inevitable. It's inevitable if we continue as we are now, but it can be avoided if we rapidly change everything. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, why haven't we rapidly changed everything? And why are we not rapidly changing everything now? What is the failure in our political systems? And this is a particularly interesting question for me, because I was a scientist, and I became a scientist because I had this crazy naive idea. I thought that the relationship between science and government was a bit like the relationship between the lookout on a ship and the captain of the ship. Scientists warn the government of danger, and the government responds by doing what needs to be done. Unfortunately, I was ridiculously naive, because governments haven't done what needs to be done. But actually, when we think about it, just for a second, it's no surprise at all that they haven't. Because serious action on climate change means one thing. It means bringing about the end of the fossil fuel age. It means shutting down the oil companies. And when this knowledge first came about in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the oil companies were the largest and most powerful industry on Earth. Until the tech industry came along, fossil fuels was the most powerful industry. And of course, we would have expected them to fight against any government action that would take climate change seriously. And that's what they did. They embarked on two big strategies. Firstly was the old strategy of political donations and corporate lobbying. I call that corruption. The second thing they did was they persuaded society that this was not something to worry about. They placed doubt in our minds. They did this initially through denialism. They created and financed a denialism industry, a disinformation industry. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's the greatest crime conceivable, but it's a crime. They've moved on from outright denialism now. That's an untenable position, but their messages have become more sophisticated. It's moved from denial to what we call predatory delay. The narratives now are the reasons why we shouldn't take emergency action. Oh, it'll be too expensive, it'll hurt the poorest in society. There's 12 of these narratives of predatory delay. And these efforts by the fossil fuel industry, as well as, aviation, motoring, construction, road building, big beef, agrochemicals, plastics, all these industries whose profitability depends on there not being any government legislation, they have fought against government legislation and it's worked. So that's the position we find ourselves in now. This year, global emissions will be higher than they have ever been. In other words, when we agreed, governments in the world agreed to slam on the brakes in 1992, but we still have our foot on the accelerator. We're still going faster. Right now, governments of the world are meeting at COP29, global negotiations, to talk about climate change. The largest single negotiating bloc at these negotiations belongs to the fossil fuel industry. So, of course, we can't look to these global negotiations for the answer. Domestically, the UK was the first major economy in the world to set a legally binding decarbonisation target. We will decarbonise by 2050. But the thing about targets is they don't count for anything without domestic policies to allow you to meet those targets. And we're still building roads. New Labour government has announced expansion of 2 new airports. We're still new oil and gas licenses. We're still building homes to such poor standards, they will need to be immediately retrofitted. We are heading in the wrong direction. And this is because governments do not respond to information. They are not motivated by doing the right thing in the public good. They respond primarily to their funders, to their lobbyists. And this was a real shock for me when I started to work out on the failures of science to influence policy. And it made me realize that, of course, policy is not about doing the right thing. It's about power and influence. And the fossil fuel companies and these other industries have all the power and influence. Of course, it's not enough just to to analyze the political situation without asking ourselves what we can do about it. And I think, of course, we cannot compete with oil companies when it comes to financial power or political or conventional political power, but we can compete by building a counterpower, and that's people power. And that's why I spend my time working with social movements. I believe, and in fact, sociologists increasingly recognize that our most likely way out of this is to reach what they call social tipping points, the point at which there is so much demand for change, so many people working for change and making change happen, that change becomes inevitable. Our positive movement and momentum and our people power tips the balance to overcome the power of private interests. Now, social movements like Extinction Rebellion and the youth strikes have been very powerful in changing the conversation. They've changed the climate crisis from this niche concern to a national conversation. But they've not yet built enough power to actually lead to changes in policy. So a key question for me is why this gap, despite the fact that polls always show most people are really concerned about this, most people want stronger action, most people recognize that social movements are a powerful force, but people are not joining them. And I think that's partly because of the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives that underlie our decision making. And there's some really powerful narratives that tell us that this is not my concern. There's the denialism and the delay. There's the fact that, times are tough. Life's tough. People are working hard and distracted by consumerism and instant entertainment. But I think one of the biggest barriers that holds many people back is we think this is not my concern. And it comes down to identity-based issues. This is something for scientists. This is something for politicians. This is something for environmentalists. And I'm not green. I'm not a crazy hippie. This is not my thing. And the key thing for me is that this shows that climate change is not a technical problem. It's not a problem for scientists and engineers. It's a cultural and a cultural and a social problem. We need to change this from an issue that most people think is not their concern to an issue that people recognize as their concern. And I think this gives everyone in this room fantastic power, because you are people that work in the media, in culture. You shape culture as artists. And we've left this problem to scientists for a long time. And we failed to persuade society that this is a problem for everyone. I think that can change, and I think that artists have a hugely powerful role in changing that. So I'd just like to end with a thought experiment, if you like. So imagine yourselves at a party or a concert or a festival. You've had a couple of glasses of wine or something nice, and there's good music, and you'd like to dance, but nobody is dancing. So of course, you're not going to get up there and shake your tail feathers, but then somebody does get up and dance, and you're a bit more tempted, but they're a much better dancer than you, or worse, they're a bit weird. So of course I'm not going to get up and join the crazy dancer. But then a couple of other people get up and start dancing, and that changes the entire ambiance. You feel liberated by the safety in numbers, so you get up there and you start to have a great time. At this point, if the music's really good and the atmosphere is really good, an amazing thing can happen. So many people start dancing that it reaches this point, a social tipping point, where even the people that didn't want to dance get drawn in. they start to feel a bit weird standing there like a plum against the wall, or they feel they're missing out on something. So they get drawn in. And in no time at all, dancing has moved from being something weird and scary to being accepted to being expected. And this is the power of social tipping points. And this is the power that you all have as cultural influencers. Sorry for that word. Nobody's asking you to be the first dancer on the dance floor, because the scientists and Extinction Rebellion and the Youth Strikers already are the first dancer on the dance floor. But when you, people that aren't scientists and others, get up and start dancing too, we validate the lone weirdo. We turn a lone weirdo into a crowd. And I just think this is our challenge now as citizens. We need to stimulate everybody else from being passive to being active. It's as simple as that, from passivity to activity. And we can do that by shaping culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. We're going to hold any questions and discussion till later in the morning. So bear in mind that we're going to go back to some of the things you've raised. But thank you for leaving us with that wonderful metaphor as well. And actually, last weekend, I was talking to Jeff Rayner, who's an ecologist, sociologist, wonderful man, who said, similar to you, I mean, he said, we're beyond hope. There's no point in just hoping. We've got to do now. And we're a room of doers. So thank you for stirring us up. I forgot some announcements. One is be careful of the cables, and especially around the camera. And if you're a smoker, go out to the river, don't go into the garden. Well, don't go in the river, but or you can. It's a bit dirty in there. But anyway, I think that's all I had. Yeah, they were the two things I had to remind you. And loos are out there. And if there's a fire, go down into the courtyard. But let's hope there isn't. So now I'm going to hand over to Nick Atchison, who has been at our side for a while now as part of the Groundwork and are now part of Groundwork Network. He's taken some really inspiring walks. Quite a few people in the room have been with him on the coast. And so he's going to hold the fort now for the morning. So over to you, Nick.
Good morning. Thank you, Veronica. Good morning, everybody. My name's Nick. I'm a writer and speaker on nature. I think I'll speak from here. I'm here basically because I'm very loud and very jolly. And so my job is to shout at people. We're a pincer movement, Veronica and me. She's got an aggressive little sign that pops onto the stand there and says, "You've got 30 seconds." And I'll just come in being very loud. So if you can all hear me, I'll speak from this side of the room. As someone who's been the lone weirdo my whole life, I feel validated. Veronica, your ladybirds are the harlequin ladybird, Harmonia axyridis, which is, I think, a species for us to learn from today, because it's a species that's from Asia, that was brought to Europe as a potential crop predator for organic farming, that then spread itself to Britain. And in our days of novel ecosystems, as Professor Bill Sutherland would say, we need such species, because they, much though they're disruptors, they are species that are they're doing well out of the mess that we've made. And we all need to do well out of the mess that we've made. But one institution that's doing a fantastic job is the Norfolk Rivers Trust. And we're going to start now with Tim Fisher at Norfolk Rivers Trust, giving us an introduction to the work of the Norfolk Rivers Trust in the wet environment of Norfolk. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Nick. Morning, everybody. So just leading on from what Charlie was talking about, there's two things in my mind. I'm a Norfolk boy. I grew up in Hunstanton, went to school in Hunstanton, went to school in Lynn, grew up actually in Snettisham. I know Heacham Beach well. I tried to fish behind Heacham Beach. I know those caravans. So it was interesting hearing that side of it. And it's also interesting as someone that I love this county, and I've seen it change. I remember the fields burning with stubble at the end of harvest 30, 40 years ago. So what's fascinating is seeing the change that's happening, because land management is changing, hopefully for the positive. So there was that, and there was the other thing that Charlie was talking about, which is the way communities are gonna now have to deal with what's going on climate-wise. So he talked about the wildfires, and there's a farm we work really closely with up on the North Norfolk coast. Because of their management of the land, one house flooded in 2020. The coast road flooded and was closed. They lost a lot of topsoil. 3 years later, in that same village, 6 houses burnt to the ground. I mean, I went to get fuel, ironically enough, and I stood and I saw the fire above the houses. It was scary. It jumped from the landward side of the coast road across onto the salt marsh. It's the sort of thing you see in movies, but it was here. It was in a place where I've grown up. And then finally, Charlie talked about hope, and Veronica talked about doing. You know, we're doers. And actually, Norfolk Rivers Trust, I think we are a hopeful organisation, and part of that is driven by the fact that we are doers. And we're used to working with lots of different people. So, yeah, care and contamination. Am I going to press the right button? Yeah, here we go. So really, I mean, I hate PowerPoint, so this I'm going to read through this really quickly. But basically, we just need to be thinking about what are we doing? Is it positive? Is it negative? I've spoken to loads of people since I've been in this job, and there's one common fact. We all have to poo and wee. Now, with rivers, that has an influence. So what are we doing with our dishwasher tablets? What are we doing with the crops that we're growing that end up being on the supermarket shelves? Is there anything we can do that's going to be a positive rather than a negative? So in the top left-hand corner, Nick was talking about the ladybird that was brought in. This is Himalayan balsam, brought in because it was great for cattle to eat before we started to manufacture cattle feed. It's a real problem for rivers. It kills, outcompetes any plants of the riverbank. So we spend a lot of time clearing Himalayan balsam, which can stand taller than me. We have a problem with floods. So this is something we put in last year, and it's helping protect 6 houses from agricultural flooding. It's basically a dry riverbed, and it will flood when it needs to, so it's alleviating the flood risk in that area. But then we've also got infrastructure, so we've got the bridge. This is in the village I live in. So we've got this lovely river that then is pinched and constrained, and that can have a knock-on effect as well. So this care, this contamination, this positive, this negative, I'm thinking about it all the time. There's not any easy solutions, really. So again, this is in my village. So just the other side of that grassy verge, we've got the River Burn. So it's a lovely chalk stream, but this was last year, and we've got a service cover that is bubbling up. But this is an interesting, situation we're in. We have got thousands of years of occupation, and we've built infrastructure, houses, factories, mills, and we're not used to change. We have quite a short lifespan on our planet, and so it's hard to foresee what it's going to be like in 100 years' time. But the River Burn has got a series of linear villages that have grown up parallel to the River Burn because it was a really good resource for agriculture, for domestic use. And then in the 70s, they put in the sewage system parallel to the river, parallel to the villages, parallel to the road that runs from Fakenham to Burnham Market. And what one of the local people in one of the creeks said last month is, "We are the lowest of the low." And he meant that literally. They're right down in that valley bottom with the sewage infrastructure, with the road, with its runoff, with the village. And they're helpless. The groundwater has gone up because we've had such a wet winter. The river can't take away all that water. So we've got major problems. We are under pressure. Hopefully this will play. Yeah. So this culvert here, that brown sediment packed water going into the River Burn, that's quite hard to find the source. And I finally found the source. That culvert runs under a housing estate and then into the river, but behind the housing estate is the fields, and so actually it's agricultural runoff. So I'm going to blitz through because I've had my 1 minute, which is very good. I'll leave you with this actually. This is an interesting concept, and this is what Jonah said when we had the walk on by Warren Camp a few weeks ago. We cannot restore rivers. Is that me? Because we can't go back 10,000 years to post-Ice Age Britain. We've got all of this infrastructure, but what we can do, and this is where the hope is, we can start to return our wetlands and our rivers to a place where they're replicating more natural processes. And when we build and dig, we're replicating what beavers do. Very quickly, the plants and animals start to colonise, and that's where the hope is. The joy, working for Norfolk Rivers Trust and working with all those other people that we work with, is going onto a site. This is Swanton Nova's, this design work. It was a ditched part of the River Stiffkey. It's now got lovely meanders, scrapes and pools, so we've now got snipe, and we've got, very quickly, caddisfly rolling and tumbling in that new stream. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Tim. Sorry to rush you.
No,
I think between us, Veronica and I have created what ecologists call a landscape of fear, where the speakers are worried about what we're going to do next. We're in a room where construction began in 1508. There have been artistic responses to environments along this very river for at least 500 years and many, many centuries prior to that. And so we're now going to hear from some of the artists who are working with Groundwork Gallery on the Artists in Residence programme, and we're beginning with James Aldridge. James.
Thank you.
James,
Right.
the artist presenting, if you can stay facing forwards, it's much easier for everyone to hear you rather than turning around.
Okay. Right, hello everybody. So my work is all about people's relationship with place in some way. And over the last few years I've been focusing mainly on rivers and other wetlands. Basically, I live in Wiltshire, so in the centre of Wiltshire, in a place called the Vale of Pewsey. It's a wide valley. You have the Marlborough and Pewsey Downs on one side. You have Salisbury Plain on the other side. And within this valley is the place where the Salisbury Avon or the Hampshire Avon begins. So about half a mile from my house is the beginnings of the Salisbury Avon. And in lockdown, myself and my son used to visit the river probably about once a day as part of our sort of allowed constitutional. And I just started to develop a much greater awareness of how the river changed over time. And out of that evolved a research project called Queer River, which was all about queer in terms of queering our sense of our perceptions of rivers. So rather than taking an inherited idea of what a river is, it's very much about using your embodied experience and artful practices to investigate rivers and explore the interrelationship of the community of life that is a river. So, if you like, starting with the idea of this kind of blue ribbon across a map, but really blurring and breaking down the binaries in terms of humans and nature, above and below the water, land and water, and so on. And this is, let's try and stay facing forward. This is an image taken from an audiovisual piece that I made called Chalk in the Blood. And this is a piece which sort of investigates my relationship with my own local chalk stream. And it's very much about that embodied, visceral relationship. So in my research, I walk and talk and make with other people in and alongside rivers. It can involve walking, swimming in rivers, cycling alongside rivers. And as part of that, I made a series of inks from plants that grow along the Avon and used those inks to create drawings exploring this bodily relationship with rivers. So bodily in terms of the walking and the investigating and the touching and the swimming, but also very much looking at the relationship between river health and human health. Top right is an image from my sketchbook when I got to a point where I found out I had kidney stones, which wasn't brilliant, but it took me off and down a bit of a rabbit hole, really, exploring, if you like, the inner flows as well as the outer flows. The fact that you can't say that's a river over there and I'm over here. The two are intricately entwined and we are part of each other. And that's what this work is all about, really, breaking down our preconceived ideas of our separateness from the rest of what we come to call nature and investigating our interbeing, if you like. And when I was in the hospital waiting for an X-ray, a friend texted me and she said, because she knows what I'm like, She said, "Did you know it's the Saint's Day of the patron saint of kidney stones today?" which was very handy. So I Googled him, and he turned out to be what we'd probably describe today as a queer abbot. And he was based at Rievaulx Abbey in Yorkshire, and he was very much into rivers, connected with rivers in different ways, basically. And that took me off on another path of research. So this research project is very much about, yes, it's about rivers, but it's also about where those rivers take us. It's a flowing piece of research that isn't fixed, and it sort of echoes the way that rivers function and behave. And I'm coming on to the work in Norfolk. What I wanted to do, basically, is to show you how I came into the work in Norfolk, how the work with Groundwork Gallery has sort of coalesced with my existing research, and then a little hint about what's coming next. So on the right-hand side of the screen are some images of some of the participatory work that I do with people around rivers and about enabling other people to use their own bodies and imaginations and their own emotional responses to rivers, to come to know rivers in different ways. And so that's some working with schools and local communities in Hampshire, developing backpack-based interpretation that other members of the community can then borrow to investigate their own local chalk streams. And that was mainly looking at seasonal chalk streams and tributaries of the River Anton near Andover. The image on the left, just briefly, is taken from a project called The Ripple Effect, which is a project I set up with Wessex Archaeology and the Environment Agency, working with local people with some kind of mental health need, using art to respond to our experience of rivers in the moment, but also looking at river archaeology and using that to imagine how we might live with rivers in a future affected by climate breakdown. So there's a little glimpse, basically, of what has happened so far. And then, through meeting Veronica and Catherine at the gallery, I developed a proposal of how I could take that work with chalk streams in Wiltshire and Hampshire and apply it in some way to Norfolk, which is how I came to make a proposal for the residency. And within the residency, my intended focus sort of shifted somewhat in that I started to look at extraction in terms of the extraction of animals and animal bodies from wetland ecosystems. So basically what happens when we hunt and kill something to a point of local extinction, what happens to that ecosystem when we take it out of that interconnected web of life. Looking particularly at beavers, with Tim's help, visiting the River Glaven and the beaver reintroduction site there. Looking also at the relationship between the River Nar and whaling, particularly whaling or the hunting of bowhead whales in Greenland and Svalbard, and how beavers are now being reintroduced. I've been looking at the research of some researchers from Exeter University who are looking at renewed coexistence. I'm very interested in beavers as makers or remakers of places, kind of taking places that have been damaged or changed by humans and remaking them. So bringing a kind of indigenous knowledge or a pre-colonial knowledge to wetlands that humans can learn from, potentially. So this is a taste of the work that is in the gallery at the moment. It is a finished piece in that it is finished enough to go in the gallery, but it's also very much a starting point. It's a kind of documentation of research that has begun through this process and which is continuing to evolve beyond it as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Did it occur to you your kidney stones were your physiological beavers damming your flows?
I've got them at home. So
You've got them at home. In Norfolk, all stories begin on the bed of chalk that lies underneath the whole of our landscapes in the centre of Norfolk, which is made of the bodies of tens of billions, thousands of billions of coccolithophores, ancient plankton. And the next two artists who will be speaking to us again about chalk rivers, and the next one is Kelly Hill. Kelly, over to you.
Hello, and thank you very much for all those lovely talks before. I hope I can be as eloquent and clear as they have been. My work explores how we are all a part of nature, from the particles we are made of to the air that we breathe, from where we are in the world to the relationships that we form with the more than human. Our urban environment may have alienated us from nature, but our affinity with it is innate. As the American ecologist and social biologist E.O. Wilson suggests, nature holds the key to our aesthetic, intellectual, cognitive, and even spiritual satisfaction. Photography can reveal what often goes unnoticed and bring compelling stories into public consciousness. The story I'm going to talk about today is Norfolk's unique and beautiful chalk streams. My project, Creta, that includes a portfolio of images and a short film, investigates the deep time over which chalk streams have evolved and compares it with the short-term thinking and actions that are destroying these fragile ecosystems as I journey downriver with my local hero, local activist who is here in this room. At the end of our journey, from pristine source to sea, the water is seen to flow over the detritus of human neglect. The starting point for my project at Groundwork grew out of an investigation into the impact of land and water management in the Sierra Maria Los Velas National Park in November 2022. Southern Spain is one of the most vulnerable regions in Europe to climate change. No one can ignore the impact of last month's deadly storms that devastated Valencia and led to over 100,000 people protesting local government leaders who ignored warnings and blocked measures to address the growing risk caused by human climate disruption. Historically, farmers in the region worked in symbiosis with the land, channeling and storing floodwater and snowmelt from the mountains and replenishing aquifers. As people left the countryside for the cities, these ancient systems fell into disrepair and are only now being redeveloped in small pockets. Comparatively, centuries ago, coastal areas in Norfolk were reclaimed from the sea as dikes were dug from peatlands and water was drained from the fens. Tom Crick, the history teacher in Graham Smith's 1983 novel Waterland, set in Norfolk, describes how history teaches us to read and predict nature's rhythms, while the technocrats of the Thatcher and the Reagan era demanded that we sacrifice history so that progress could work more freely. Does that sound familiar today? History blindness is a social economic fault line that is to continually mined without considering the consequences for future generations. As Crick says, there's this thing called progress, but it doesn't progress, it doesn't go anywhere, because as progress progresses, the world can slip away. It's progress if you can stop the world slipping away. My instinct in Spain was to collect rock, old tins, roots and seeds, shells and broken objects discarded in the landscape, and bring them back to the studio to draw, photograph, and where cracked or broken, repair. Kintsugi is the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery by applying a lacquer dusted with powdered gold. As a practice, it regards breakage as part of the history of an object, and repair remembers the fault rather than make it disappear. The natural world has an intrinsic way of self-healing, of repairing fault lines, regenerating and creating something new out of what has been broken. During my residency in King's Lynn, I spent my days attempting to follow the Nar Gay Borzi from the centre of town out to the countryside on foot as I am car-free. I soon discovered how undervalued waterways were in the town, and I was determined to discover more. Helen Gordon writes eloquently about the immense block of chalk that has lain beneath swathes of England's landscape for 100 million years. In Rock of Ages, How Chalk Made England, she described how the chalk escarpment begins on the east coast of Yorkshire and curves in a sinuous green sweep down the east coast, breaking off where the Wash nibbles inland. How in the south the chalk radiates out in 4 great ridges from the Salisbury Plain. I've yet to walk the Great Chalkway that links Norfolk and the Dorset coast by following the ancient flax trading routes that runs along the Chalk Ridge, but that's another project. What I didn't know when I started my research was that 85% of the 285 chalk streams worldwide are in the UK, a result of the unique landscape that was laid down over an unfathomable period of geographic time. I wanted to find some way of communicating the sense of loss that I felt when I compared the timescale that provided the ideal conditions for a thriving chalk stream with the speed with which these biodiverse environments were being irrecoverably eroded. I opened Creta with a quote from Helen Gordon. The chalk world began to come into existence around 80 to 100 million years ago, when the Earth was entering a warming phase. Seas rose rapidly, and 1/3 of the land masses present today disappeared beneath the rising waves. Geologists called this period Cretaceous, after Creta, the Latin for chalk, and it is the longest geographical time period on the stratigraphic chart. At 80 million years, it lasted far longer than the 65 million years that had elapsed since it ended. In regions where chalk is found today, the water was filled with billions of microscopic organisms called coccoliths. When they died, their skeletons sunk down beneath the clear water in such quantity that in places the ocean would have turned a milky blue. On the ocean floor, skeletons piled up, forming a soft ooze. Over time, this compacted and hardened. Living bones translated into white rock. The uniformity of the chalk, these massive thicknesses of rock, some a mile in depth, is testament to a stable, slowly drifting world, where for millions of years, nothing much happened. Tim Holt Wilson, who has been such an inspiration for many of us on the residency, kindly linked me with Russell Briggs, a local activist who campaigns against chalk streams in crisis. With Russell, I was able to travel upstreams to areas where spring water bubbles into the Norfolk landscape, providing a constant flow of clear, cold water. With Russell, I discovered how this stable current across flinty gravel beds is the perfect source of clean water, ideal for a thriving, biodiverse ecosystem. What really struck me about Russell as we traversed the countryside was his absolute commitment and passion for his subject, along with his desire to help me find the ideal breeding ground for trout. What broke me was his profound sadness when we came across areas that had been decimated by the internal drainage board, reducing the vibrant riverbank to a wall of dry dust that falls into the water and suffocates life. Many chalk aquifers, the source of chalk streams, are sadly polluted by nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilisers spread on farmland. The seemingly clear waters of chalk streams are often tainted by invisible contaminants as a result. As they flow downstream, water running off urban and rural areas bring pollutants, including fine sediments, pesticides and sewage. The natural courses taken by many chalk streams have been straightened, drained, dredged, rerouted and rebranded as drains to make space for agricultural, urban and industrial land uses. The rivers dwindle as water companies still cynically extract water from streams and aquifers. The negative effects are compounded by climate change. As a result, the Environment Agency reports that not one of England's rivers, chalk or otherwise, is in overall good health. The contrast between a thriving chalk stream and a denuded one is stark, and we need to value these mercurial sources of pure water that are life-giving and regenerative. A strategy for restoring England's chalk streams recommends granting new statutory protection that reflects their globally unique value to ecology and culture. The recent March for Clean Water brought together thousands of people from across the UK to call on the government to halve water pollution, fund regulators so they can enforce the law and give our precious and rare chalk streams in particular the proper protection they clearly need. I'm going to finish today with this image of iron-rich mud, taken when we were walking with Tim and discovering so much that would otherwise have been overlooked were it not for his thought-provoking commentary. Iron is made of the fusion from elements of the stars. It arrived on Earth millions of years ago in the form of meteor showers after a powerful luminous stellar explosion or supernova, where the lifetime of a star is exhausted. Iron is the essential element for life, as it participates in a wide variety of metabolic processes, including ion transport, DNA synthesis, and electron transport. Every living thing on Earth, plant, animal, bacteria, even cancer cells, rely on iron to flourish. The movement of iron through the biosphere is mainly controlled by plants and is an essential trace element required to produce chlorophyll. As that old sage Moby once said, we are all made of stars. We are all nature.
Thank you, Kelly. You look nervous. You absolutely smashed that. That was brilliant. Brilliant and inspiring stuff. And we'll get more brilliant and inspiring stuff now from Sophie Merritt, who continues the theme of chalk streams. Before we get there, just a thought. We're by the bank of the Great Ouse, which drains vast areas of chalky rivers from England. And I think it's the case, and there's probably no one in the room who knows better, that all of the eels migrating from the Sargasso Sea of 13 counties of England have to migrate past this place to go back. Are you shaking your head, Andrew? Oh, Andrew disagrees. I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong.
It's not only this river, though. You can go down to Severn and you've got them there.
Yeah, no. All of the eels of 13 counties. This is the nexus for draining, yes. Not in all of the eels of Britain, not at all. But this is the mouth of migration for huge areas of East Anglia and the Midlands, and all of the eels have to swim right past this very place. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so I came to this residency having thoughts about various aspects of chalk and chalk rivers, but also the cement industry and construction and the sort of links between them. And I think this started probably whilst walking along the Humberside estuary in the sort of old industrial heritage sites that are now sort of reserves and parks. And in there, you can still see the remains of the old tile industry and the overgrowth. And sort of beyond this overgrowth, there are often these small beaches of chalk along the riverside. And it's these kind of sort of scenes that catch my eye. And it's similar with a lot of derelict sites. And in Norwich, where I live, there's this construction site that I often pass on the walk into Norwich. And it was derelict for years, and when construction finally started, the excavation kind of revealed what looked like the chalk bedrock. It may have been, I wasn't sure if it's a chalk bedrock or the concrete pilings that was whatever had built on the foundations previously. And so this got me thinking about the chalk that Norwich is built on, and also the chalk river. The Wensum is a chalk river that runs through Norwich. And I was also involved in a Phase 1 habitat survey of the Wensum Valley, particularly in the area of where the proposed Western Link Road is to be built, and that area of construction. And so I was thinking about how is this new dual carriageway going to cut across the riverside of the Wensum Valley and the Tud, when they're both chalk rivers. And how will it cut across the green lanes, the hedgerows, and the wildlife habitats? And it made me think of the construction of new homes. How will all this construction connect to the local environment? And so for the work for the show, for the residency, I did a video. And the video, it starts as a car journey. It's like an imagined journey along the chalk aquifer that runs through Lincolnshire and through Norfolk. And it's a car journey. It starts at a roundabout near Boston in Lincolnshire. And so I took film footage out the car window as we were driving across the fens to Norfolk. And I like to use the sound of what you might hear in the landscape. So I use the sound of skylarks that you might see in the fields. And also what's the sounds that are underground. So I use the sound of water in a main drain outfall. And this then gradually, as we pass from the fenland to the Norfolk rivers and the chalk streams, the sound changes from into the sound of what I imagine the chalk in the aquifer as it dissolves and cracks in the water. So I was also been on a holiday in Spain, so I was thinking of how the impact of the warming climate on the impact on the groundwater, the aquifers. The video ends at a saline lagoon near Valencia with a flamingo. So that was a year ago. I think I'll move on. So what has the residency, what have I taken from the residency? And obviously there's a lot of interconnections, some of which Kelly has touched on, that's brought up. But the main thing is meeting the other artists and forming new relationships and connections and discussions. And a group of us have done that and started on a new project to do with the wash. And so we teamed up to come up with various activities of aspects of the wash and the prospect of building a new wash barrage and freeport that would connect Gibraltar Point to Hunstanton. And so at first I wasn't quite sure what I would do for this. So I thought, well, how can you connect people to a landscape, the coastline of the wash, which is, on first impression, pretty bleak. And so I came up with the idea of doing some postcards of like a really quick tour around the wash. And I made these postcards and I gave them a look of kind of being old-fashioned to try and pull people in with a feeling of nostalgia as like a way of somehow connecting. And this is just two of the postcards. And so they're both views across the wash. So one from Gibraltar Point looking towards Norfolk. And Norfolk is kind of like a mirage hovering just above the horizon. And the other view is Snettisham looking towards Boston. You can just see the Boston stump in the distance. And just as the tide comes in over the mudflats and the sun is setting. And I really like these views across the distance, and I also like to record the sounds that carry across these spaces. And I think I use nostalgia a lot, just a bit of nostalgia, because too much nostalgia and it turns into something completely different. And so I think that's another talk, I think. So I'm going to end there with, yes, and this is me anticipating the arrival of the starling murmuration at Avalon Marshes, and that wall of sound that you hear as a mass of murmurating birds fly over your head and trying to capture that sound. And that's kind of, as well as all the stuff on the wash and developing that project with Jane, Catherine, Heidi and Caroline, yes, to work with that sound. Yeah, it's an amazing experience. Okay, thank you.
Sophie, thank you. Sophie, I'm sure there's not a person in this room who wouldn't like to go on a quiet walk with you through those landscapes. We're all absolutely inspired. As Aristotle is said to have said, nature abhors a vacuum. If we create an open space with nothing living in it, something sooner or later moves in. And very often the first organism to move in is a bryophyte. And here to talk about her creative relationship with mosses, please welcome Lucy Dukes.
Hello. Hello everyone. Hey, so I am here to talk to you about mossabilities, like the possibilities of mosses. That's been the theme of the project that I've been exploring, particularly with groundwork. So I came to groundwork last year, very luckily, through winning this residency with Art for the Environment that was based at groundwork with UAL, where I was doing my master's. And I was inspired by the idea of how we might be able to learn from mosses, particularly to challenge like systems of extractivism and to become more regenerative and reciprocal. So, to begin with, a couple of things about mosses that you might find interesting, that I certainly found interesting. So first of all, I was really inspired by this book, Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I don't know if some of you have read it, which is awesome. If anyone hasn't, I would highly recommend. So in it, she blends Western scientific knowledge with indigenous Potawatomi knowledge together in these beautiful stories that kind of show this way of how we might be able to model our lives on mosses and model human societies. So the core things about mosses that I was inspired by is, first of all, just how ancient they are. So they're over 450 million years old, which means they evolved back when there was no soil, back when some of the first things to come out of the ocean, essentially, back when there was only rock. For this reason, it means they don't have any roots because there was nowhere for them to go. Instead, they have rhizoids that cling onto the surface of things. And when they cling on, they kind of create soil where there was none, very slowly over a long period of time. So a lot of the original soil that built on this earth comes from mosses together. That also means, however, that in places where the soil has been destroyed or depleted, so when it's been industrial agriculture has like compacted things down, or when things have been mined and we just have loose mine tailings with no nutrients in them, mosses will come back in and will re-knit the soil together, stabilize it, and then add nutrients so that things can start to grow again and life can come back to this place. So they're kind of like the beginning. They enrich and nourish and incredibly regenerative. They are also very, very sensitive. Really, they're site-specific. They're really attuned to their environment. So this image behind here is actually the surface of a moss. So each leaf of a moss is only 1 cell thick. It means they're in the most intimate contact with the atmosphere. So if I can ask everyone to just take a really deep breath in right now, and then breathe back out again. The lining of our lungs is basically like the surface of a moss, in this constant exchange and dialogue with the atmosphere around it. We, like mosses, we also hold and store things that we breathe in, and then we release them again. Mosses are exquisite at removing pollution from the atmosphere, but they're also exquisite at holding on to water. So we've been talking about these very moist zones and waters and rivers and things. So mosses actually will hold on to water, absorb as many nutrients as they can for it, use it to photosynthesize, remove pollutants, filter it, clean it, and then very slowly release it back out into the world. And as they do that, it slows down what would essentially be flooding otherwise. So we'll see mosses on the sides of buildings, we'll see them on these vertical rivers going down trees, and they are basically mitigating soil erosion and helping to stop flooding on like a global scale, this very, very tiny creature. So the final thing about mosses that I want to draw attention to is that they are communities. They exist as these thriving communities, and they can only thrive because of the way that they exist together, because of how they hold resources in their interstices between each other, basically. So when you see mosses, you probably think they're quite like furry if you reach down and touch them. They actually slow down the air currents this way. And by slowing them down, they create like a little warm, humid boundary layer. So essentially, you have like a mini ecosystem of a tiny rainforest with as much diversity of life as you would get in a huge rainforest in this tiny little scale. So in this way, mosses also, obviously, they sequester carbon. If we look at sphagnum peat bogs, and carbon sinks in the way that acts as well. Essentially, in all the ways that we in our current society deplete and destroy, mosses come and regenerate and rebuild, but they use principles that we can enact and learn from as well. So while I was at Groundwork, some of the ways that I was exploring doing this is I thought, well, how can I learn from mosses without treating them as a material, right? Whilst acknowledging their agency and not extracting them directly either, right? And so that means that it was hard because a lot of the ways that we think of traditionally gathering knowledge are quite extractivist, right? We put things under microscopes, we prod and poke, we change their environments, we see what happens. We don't really leave space for the agency of more than human communities that we're part of. So one of the things I was looking at was drawing as a way of knowing. So I see the world through drawing. I feel like everything is drawing all the time. Our bodies, as we are right now, we are like living drawings in the way we move, and we're like drawings in 3D space, basically. The same with the trees outside. This building is a drawing in space and time as well over the centuries. And living creatures are drawing constantly all the time. So I was looking at drawing as a way of gathering knowledge, which is also something that has been explored by a theorist and an artist called Gemma Anderson Tempini, who's written a book about drawing as a way of knowing. And I would go out on field work with these wonderful bryologists and ecologists in the local area and visit these like gorgeous, gorgeous bogs and fens and see the mosses and get to know them and stay in that place and then draw in that location as a way to kind of like sensitize myself to that place and try and transcribe it into the drawing as well. So what we have in the top left-hand corner are these mosses that have dried up. So this is another really cool thing that mosses can do with water. They're incredibly resilient. They can dry out. They can actually be dried out for hundreds of years and seemingly be dead for all intensive purposes. And then when water comes back, they can come back to life again. So we see them open. If you ever come across a patch of dried moss, I encourage you to just share a bit of your water with it and see them come back to life again. And then we had a drawing that I did over the river here. So I was sitting with some mosses that grow on the edge of the harbour here, and then watching the river, like the sunset over the river with them. The other way that I've been exploring building this kind of moss knowledge is through workshops, through collaborating as a way of knowing. So I've done these with one collaborator in particular called Laura Melissa Williams, who's another artist who's inspired by mosses. And we've done them at various different places, but a particularly special one that we did was at Groundwork Gallery, where we did a small workshop with 5 other artists, and we worked together to introduce these artists to mosses and the way they exist, using sensory meditation, using kind of like moss walks, using tools from art, science and philosophy and all these things. And then together we collaborated. Every workshop has to end with a form of like collaborative creating, because a core idea is getting away from like single ownership and instead creating together, because we can create something that's more than the sum of its parts. So as part of that, we made this piece of work here. And, perfect timing. All right. So I wanted to read from you one of the stories. This is an installation that I did at Groundwork Gallery as well that was part of this drawing using site-specific pigments. But what I wanted to read was one of these short stories that was written collaboratively, kind of unknowingly as well, and see how it makes sense. I was going to read the first one, but since Charlie's talk, I'm actually going to read the second one instead. So, once upon a moss time, we came upon a bower of trees, giant oaks, firs, and redwoods. Is that what they're really called? Who decided? The vast green bed held the head of a golden sun, born on the ground. She blinked open, a change in temperature, inside protected and safe. Loose tendrils interconnected, as if a secret hidden in the past, accessed in the present, and the legacy of future ancestors. These tendrils raced and grew and reached in at the same time as stretching out, and touching the air full of rich, potent scents that tingled all the senses, joining the whole of the universe in its quest. Together we hop and skip, jump and twirl in the mossy forest, a microcosm of swirling life. Anything is possible here, and that has left us with so much fun to be experienced. We will all dance together.
Thank you, Lucy. That was beautiful. I'm sure you'll join me in thanking all 4 of the artists who spoke to us. Tim, we've been talking up till now very largely about chalk and about chalk streams and about the importance of Norfolk in a chalk stream context, given that that's very largely what you personally but also professionally are engaged with. Could you just give us some context for Norfolk chalk rivers and what we mean globally?
Wow, that's a big question.
Obviously.
Yeah, of course. So chalk rivers, we've talked a bit about the chalk ridge that runs from basically the south coast all the way up to Norfolk and then crosses the Wash into Lincolnshire. Really special, and it was great to hear what everyone was saying about that chalk this morning. How do you define a river as being a chalk river is probably a little bit of a moot point. It depends which scientist you talk to. But chalk rivers, if they've got water rising through a chalk bedrock, they will produce a particular ecological community, so particular plants that will grow there. The water quality is very different. It's wonderful, and so that's really special. And for us to have 20, 25, depending on who you talk to, chalk rivers in East Anglia is absolutely amazing. Yeah, I mean, what more can I say? It makes Norfolk what it is, really, and it's incredible. You think of the Wensum in Norwich, and you compare it to that famous artist who drew. Escape me, the woman in the lake, in the river, with the stream of the ranunculus. Yeah. Which apparently it was drawn in a bath, but that's by the by. That is a chalk stream. You stand at Riverside in Norwich and you look at the Wensum. Does it look the same? Has it got the same features? Has it got the same value? But you go to the headwaters of the Wensum, up Fakenham Way, and you find these wonderful little microcosms of what a chalk stream should look like. Very close to what a chalk stream shouldn't look like, where it's been ditched, and there's a septic tank leaking, and there's a pig farm, and there's and. So yeah, they are really special. I think we do need to tune into what makes a chalk river special. I think that's enough, isn't it?
That's certainly plenty to be starting with, Tim. Thank you. And we'll pass it, if we may, now to you, Russ. I've had the privilege of walking along your chalk river with you. You exist in a world in which the chalk rivers have been punished and damaged and raped by humanity, and you bring to your campaigning tremendous hurt over this situation. Tell us a little bit about how you became engaged with chalk rivers and why you've become such a passionate and vocal advocate for them.
I've been lucky enough, I live alongside the River Barrowby near Hillington. I mean, some of you might actually know it's spring sources at Flitcham, literally probably 300 or 400 yards from the main springs. It's the most beautiful chalk stream you can imagine. Obviously a few of you have actually seen it. Crystal clear water, full of trout, every sort of plant you can imagine, otters there. I'm a bit wound up this morning actually because I went to the stream this morning and actually found a snare on the other side of the river bank with a fox actually in there, and I'll even name the estate as Sandringham Estate, and I actually released it, so obviously that will be sparked up later on. But once you've seen the best river in the country, as far as I'm concerned, are many of you from King's Lynn? Are you sort of, many of you local? Well, localish.
That ain't proper local.
Yes,
you're up the road.
Reasonably. I'm sort of what's known as an eco-warrior activist. I've been called a few other things, swampy, but my days of growing dreadlocks and climbing trees is well gone. But I'm very passionate, as Kelly, who walked with me last year, knows about the rivers. And when I see a problem, that just explodes in my head. Because I'm basically self-employed, run my own business, I'm affiliated to no one, so I can have my own opinions without, feeling like no one's going to jump on me. Having said that, the reason I asked whether you're all from King's Lynn is because I am part of the Gay River Revival, and as Kelly was saying, the Gay, a lot of Norfolk rivers, Anglo-Saxon names, were three-letter words. You had the Tat, the Nar, the Mun,
The Tud.
To the Tuds, I know there's another one, Hun.
Yeah.
This was the one that runs to King's Lynn, was originally called the Gay, came from Gayton, obviously that's where the spring source was. Over years, when it got towards King's Lynn, it actually flowed through a massive oak wood. Ballsy Church ruins, Time Team did a documentary there, probably in the 90s, and they actually found a medieval settlement there. Am I running out of time?
No, you're not.
And they were making ships there, and obviously because there's so many, obviously the oak forest, then it became the Gay Wood, so obviously it lost the three-letter word. But when I look at that river, that starts up at Well Hall at Gayton, crystal clear, as you imagine, loads of trees. You go down about a mile, it hits Pot Row, void and sewage works, get a big dose of ammonia, phosphates, the river deteriorates a little bit, goes to Derby Fen, which there's a couple of buckets here. Like the white one, the bigger one, that's actually a sample of water I took from Derby Fen yesterday morning. If you have a look in there, you'll see starworts, water crowfoot, loads of insects. There's even one mayfly in there, and the rest are little gamma shrimps. The smaller buckets, once you get down to the Bawsey ruins, there's a whole series of, there's basically a load of industrial pollution, agricultural pollution. I've been sort of naming and shaming the business for years. We've got a whole load of chalybeate coming in from a place they call the void and drain. Chalybeate, it's basically iron rich. I mean, Kelly touched on one of the pictures, or Tim will know. It's chalybeate water. It's crystal clear until you disturb the minerals underneath, and it becomes this bright orange. So once this river hits the Bawsey area, the river just deteriorates from this crystal clear water to this horrible, looks like the colour of tea. And it goes all the way down to King's Lynn, as Kelly would go again. She was taking photographs of it, middle of King's Lynn, and the whole river is just this thick brown sediment, lifeless basically.
No, Russ, you're the one who's got the expertise. You're here because we love your passion and the commitment that you have for these rivers.
Onto the Go River Revival, I mean, I would like to show you some pictures, but one of them dropped out. But Go River Revival, you can find it, you can Google it. We've got a website now, Facebook site, we're on Twitter, but we're basically a group of 5 of us I've got one member of the Norfolk Rivers Trust. We've got a couple of councillors, obviously very skilled people, journalists, etc. And we're fighting to actually get the Gayward River sort of basically restored. So just outside King's Lynn, I don't know how many of you came in on the bypass from the Hardwick roundabout, but you actually cross the river there. You'd never know it, because if you look to either side, the river is literally the colour of tea, and it looks like a Fenland dyke. But theoretically, what we want is either side of there is a lovely meandering chalk stream, loads of lakes and ponds. You can imagine all the people that come to North Norfolk to see the birds. As you're stuck in the queue on the Northland bypass, or you know, sat there, you'd see all these lovely ponds and stuff. Even when it flooded last year, I counted 80 curlews on the meadows there. Unfortunately, there's a different farmer now who's taken it over, and he's just, all he's interested in basically is growing crops on there. The previous, I'm conscious at the time, waffling, but the previous farmer, a chap called Will Hancock, when he owned it, would allow the meadows there to flood every single year, it's part of the floodplain, and just have cattle on there. Unfortunately, the new landowners have basically new money, a bit like, I'm not going to say the name, but a bit like Dyson and Jeremy Clarkson and all that sort of lot. They've gone in there, and farms there to be farmed, and they've been draining the land, getting the IDB to dig out all the ditches and stuff, which, again, Kelly did see how I got angry, because when we walked up to Derby Fen at the height of last summer, we were sort of looking at the river, and then suddenly, bang, the IDB had been, because I've been having a real battle with them, they'd literally flailed the blanks, stripped all the plants out, completely trashed the chalk stream ecology. And the one good thing I can say is that because we've been publicly shaming them, or I have, the IDB this year, the King's Lynn IDB, have completely stopped dredging the river. They've done a bit in Refley and King's Lynn, they've had to, and a bit near Linsport in Lynn, but all upstream, the other side of the bypass, they've left it totally. And this year they just had taken just sit and look, and I know once the winter comes on, because obviously we're going to finally get some cold weather next year or next week, all the plants, Tim will know, Fool's watercress, it looks like it's blocking out the river, will all turn to mush, all the reeds will die down, no problem.
No, Russ, not at all. Just for everyone's information, because some people might not come from that background, IDB stands for Internal Drainage Board, which is essentially a government agency whose job is to get water off the land, because right here we're at sea level and you flood fairly easily. If you will build a city that's under sea level, it's going to flood, and the IDB's job is to get water off the land, working with other organisations like the Environment Agency, but they're the ones their job is just to get rid of water, and any water management strategy has to be done in the context of that. In a moment, you'll be breaking up into groups and discussing themes which have come up. And one of the things which strikes me, which is really interesting in what Russ says, is about that we've heard from 4 knowers of place, 5 knowers of place, 6 knowers of place, knowers of landscape, and there seems to be almost an intimate rosary-like repetition of journeying alongside streams or quarried places or extractivist places, getting to know the dramatis personae of organisms who live there and what they tell you about the place and what they communicate and allow you to do as a campaigner and allow you to do as an artist, which perhaps might be something worth discussing in your groups when you break into them in a minute. But Tim, to come back to you, to riff off what Russ said, the Gayward is a very it's a textbook example of a river that's been screwed over by humanity. And it seems ironic to me that this town stroke city has evolved in this very place because of what nature has given to it. Its situation in this border between chalk and sandstone and peat fen, and with these extraordinary rivers feeding into it and flowing through it. And yet, in time, that relationship has changed to one of, we'll just dump our crap in that. What would you, as Norfolk Rivers, if you were given free control of the Gayward, how would you go about giving it back? Yeah.
Well, just as Russell said, just putting back some of those more natural processes, but I'm not actually going to answer that question directly, because I want to step back to Charlie's dancing metaphor, because actually it's a really good metaphor for rivers and the political, cultural barriers that prevent rivers becoming what they should be. A river, whether it's 10 kilometres long or 40 kilometres long, has more than one landowner that has an influence on what's happening with that river. So they're a vector for poor and positive land management. So you might be a land manager dancing to a slightly weird tune and you want to give it back, the floodplain back to the river and reconnect it. and you'll look a bit weird standing there dancing on your own. But those other landowners, it's almost like a shop window, even if there's not public access. So another landowner, maybe neighbouring, will kind of have a look and go, that's interesting. And they'll wait and they'll see what happens, just like the IDB are doing. And then 9 times out of 10, they will think, actually, that looks good. I remember curlew when I was growing up. They're on my neighbouring landowner's land now. I want some of that. So gradually you get this kind of ball rolling, this momentum where landowners, land managers start talking to each other and realising that they want to have a benefit for nature at the same time as trying to produce food for us as well, or whatever else. So that dancing to that weird tune we're getting more and more people that are engaging and hugging the weird, if you like, and seeing the benefits of that. And I do hope with the Gaywood, it's interesting because, Russell and I have talked about this. There's a slight age gap, minor age gap, but we both went to King's Lynn to Tech, and we both walked through the walks, which is where the Gaywood flows through. I never really thought of it as being a river. I just thought of it as being an ornamental park as I was drinking my special brew by the bus shelter. But, so it's that, the longer you live in a landscape, the more you learn. And it goes back to that, well, my dad did this, so I'm not going to change. But then you get another generation who notices something going over the other side of the fence thinking, oh, no, I am going to change. So the Gaywood, there is hope with the Gaywood. And there's that, I can't remember, that tipping point, that social tipping point is really important. So Russell, you're not only an aggravator and an upsetter, but you do great work with Norfolk Rivers Trust, testing water, scientifically rigorous and tested. And actually that, people going to the river weekly, obviously testing water, that acts as a deterrent and it acts as a signal to water companies, to the IDB, there are people that actually care about this place. Maybe we need to think about change of practice.
And that knowing of rivers intimately is very, very important because we're all witnesses to rivers. And I have a feeling about rivers, it's actually you're a really, really good example of the opposite of this, Russ. I have a feeling about rivers that we see them, we cross them on bridges, big slabs of concrete that we've put over the top of them, and we walk past them in parks where they've been so canalised and turned into pretty Victorian bits of tweeness, but we don't actually see them from above. I live on a river, I live on the Wensum, and I see and hear all kinds of birds that you would not expect to see and hear where I live. I mean, I never get any work done because I sit at my desk and I hear, there's one of those flying over. But I see things move. The birds see the river as a meaningful, connected, joined up flow of life and carbon and water and genes through the landscape as a corridor. But we don't see, you do see rivers as corridors, and you work them and walk them and patrol them in that rosary telling sort of way. For you, they're living things, but I fear most of us see them in snapshots and we don't connect the places up, which is very much what both of you, but you do. And it's your walking that's got you there, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the amount of arguments over people that will say to me, that drain needs digging out or that ditch needs digging out. And I was with a lady actually yesterday. I'm going on to another story. I actually water test. I've got a phosphate tester and a ammonia tester over in the black boxes. And part of what I do is virtually weekly is test one of the tributaries to the River Tat, which is a tributary of the Wensum up at East and West Rudham. I've been doing that for 2 years. I was basically, with my parents moved to East Rudham in 1971, so I've been there literally 50 years of my life. The chalk stream I've known all my life. I went there yesterday morning, again, after releasing a fox and a snare on San State this morning. Went there yesterday, and lo and behold, the stream I've known from a boy. We used to sort of play football in the football pitch there, the playing fields, swim in there, splash water, drink the water back in those days, 1970s, 1980s. It's been dredged out. And it's gone from what I'd call a chalk stream, about that width, full of all the plants you can imagine. I actually witnessed trout spawning in there January last year because we had obviously a high rainfall. Usually it can be dry because, again, angling water tend to over-extract it. But this year it's literally been turned into a V-side trench. The metre of gravel, it's been dug out with all the plants, dumped 10 metres away. I mean, you all know yourself, you've got a pond. If you decide to set the plants out, you stick them alongside so the creepy crawlies can go back in. So it's just everything this week is just, as Kelly knows, I sort of walk along and she would have heard quite a few Fs and C words. I mean, we were happy.
You're with friends,
along.
It's fine.
We were.
Edited them out of the...
Yeah. One minute we're walking along with your dog, then it's suddenly But it is that mindset, because a river, they are wildlife corridors. I mean, even the Gay River, I mean, if anyone has a walk around the walks in King's Lynn or towards Eastgate, you'll look at the river, you'll see this coffee-covered river. You'll be lucky to see any fish in there, because it's never clear. It does clear every now and then, but there should be eels. I mean, there's a famous book, I'm trying to think, can't think of the name of it now, but anyway, there was a couple of children got moved up here in the war, and they said they used to look at the river in the summertime, and they used to call them darnies. They said the river was black with eels swimming up. I met an old chap about a few weeks ago when I was doing a water test, and he said, we used to go bobbing for eels down here. I said, bobbing? He said, there was ball of wool, drop it in the river below Eastgate, and you'd find 5 or 6 big eels on the end. He said, I took my grandson down there about 15 years ago, bugger, we never caught one effing bloody eel, and he's never caught one since. So, what's changed? There should be sea trout swimming up this river, going as far where the spring sources are and spawning. Ironically, one chap I know did actually catch one last year, and that was below the Borsey ruins. So the Babingley is the first river to go into Great Ouse, as you were saying about. This is the first part of the catchment. The next river is the Gaywood, and we've got the River Nile. So we literally got 3 chalk streams hitting King's Lynn. And, if they were crystal clear under the Babingley, because I've actually witnessed sea trout in there, the Gaywood, you'd be lucky if any trout can get past what they call the pollution zone. They've got to go through a, chalybeate silts and pollution with high phosphates. It obviously sticks to gills of fish. So a trout was coming in. Basic sea trout, the same as salmon. So once they're sort of born, they get to about 6 inches in size to a foot. They don't usually find enough food in the rivers, so if they go to the sea for 5, 6, 7 years, and they'll come back every year and then spawn. But whereas obviously salmon does a one-way trip, that stays out for 5, 6 years, comes in, and they usually die, don't they? But a sea, yes, should come back every single year. But obviously, if we could just clear up this river, as I say, you're saying they're wildlife corridors, and it's not just fish. Everything uses them.
Russell, thank you. We are now treading on our time, so I'm about to get the angry look from Veronica. How dare you? So we're now going to break into groups. And first, a couple of things. One, would the artists, please, who've had the privilege of taking part and have contributed so much in Veronica's and Groundwork Gallery's artist in residence programs, would you circulate to a degree among the tables and share your experience and share the work that you're doing? But a question occurs to me, which might be a starting point, which is that we've heard from Russ, we've heard from Charlie, we've heard from others, the anguish, the passion, the hurt, the anger that we all feel at the terrible destruction, the wanton destruction around us at all times. But Charlie spoke, and I'm struck by a line from Rebecca Solnit, that hope is an axe with which we bash down doors. Our job as people who are interested in the creative arts is to translate anger into hope, is to translate anger into action. And I wonder if that's a question on which to begin discussion. So if you would now separate, well, you're on tables perhaps. Is that how you see this working, Veronica? Yeah. Do you want to tell people what to do?
Well, it's a bit kind of experiment. We'll see how it works. But if you talk among yourselves on your table, and then we'll reserve 15, 20 minutes.
Hello. We spent a lot of time talking among ourselves, getting to know each other, trying to find out exactly what our different angles and approaches were, and so it's about connection, I suppose, connecting with each other, which I think is an important theme. We connecting with each other, connecting with the environment. So that's a sort of basic social message. We discovered the idea that that actually we wanted to encounter a heart on some level, a sort of mutual heart, a core. Big theme was walking, going out into the countryside and encountering resources for inspiration. So it might be peat or ochre or woad. Something else we also considered was our homes themselves. How ready are they for meeting the challenges of climate change? And also just the basic day-to-day matter of our how are we going to heat the house, for example? I said that I live in a house that hasn't got central heating. So that then asks you, oh, well, what's it going to be? Is it going to be gas or wood? Or is it going to be electricity? And these sort of issues are the turning point of a lot of the questions that are around our responses to climate change. So, we explored lots of different areas, I think. Right, time to pass on.
Okay, I'm Bridget. You're going to be hearing from me tomorrow as I'm doing the keynote, but I won't be here. So you will hear from me now. So we talked quite a lot about the role of artists in truth-telling and educating people. So we talked about what are the levers for change. And the three that we really identified are legislation, education, and more democracy. So we talked around how artists can engage and educate in ways that are more experiential, valuing diversity, involve more co-creation, more subtle, and more integrated, the integration of the hard challenge that we face and, the more exciting imagination. We talked about, it moved on to talking about the sort of interface with ordinary life, and, art being seen as a bit elite and different, and how important it is to have, art engagements that are in real places where people go, like Prime Yark in Great Yarmouth in a shopping centre. And to have a huge variety of different cultural practices and people, artistic practitioners, and not a sort of elite niche type of eco-art. And then we talked about arts activism and the challenge and struggle of making work that is too activist, or whether, artists now need to make more urgent and political work. Anyway, there's a lot more on there, but I hope that sums it up.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Kate. We were a table of that firstly enjoyed the computer paper. If anybody else has, thanks. So we began in doom and shame, and then tried to pick ourselves up from that. And there's lots of notes on this sheet of paper. We've just done a quick pulling together of the main ones. So what agency can we have as artists was the question, and how do we speak beyond ourselves and existing audiences? That in the doom we feel that we don't know what to do, and so the dance analogy is interesting in that we all know how to dance, or we know what a dance looks like, but often in this current time, we're not sure what the dance is. If just like what it feels like, we don't know what to do. Then we've had some points. Hang on, I'm turning the sheet. That artists have often their role has often been an engagement through nostalgia, or the work is used or criticised for having a nostalgic lens. But yet we often use nostalgia to engage people in, for example, we were talking about the loss of the Swift, how people can become very nostalgic very quickly, but it's not necessarily a useful subject in the art. But that how artists can also now help us imagine and show us a new future. And that we imagined that imagining might be to show process rather than just outcomes. And then we, sadly, but maybe importantly, spoke of Trump and the current that situation, given that all the facts in the world don't make any difference because people are voting on feel. And so how do we move the facts and the gathering of facts into feel?
I'm going to do our group, and I'm standing up because I'm doing a talk after lunch, and I thought this might make it less nerve-wracking if I've already stood up in the room and looked at you all. So there's a bit of method. We started off with the idea of the dance, the weird one, standing up. We thought it was a really interesting kind of point, and but we wondered that if you're the one that stands up and you're weird and you're a bit scary, weird, you're not going to be the right person to bring in and break down those barriers for the rest of the room to join you. And so there has to be a level of accessibility about the weird one, and it has to be the right weird one to bring you all in. So we did wonder with the Extinction Rebellion that whether it's put people off because it's just a bit too much, and it's brilliant, but you need somebody else coming in to help make that more accessible. And we were then thinking that if within the local network, if there was more visibility of the way you get to know the weird ones within your local community, that once you got to know that they weren't actually that weird, then you could have access to them. So we were wondering that if you could engage more within the community and have maybe artists that were visible within as just a much more kind of highlighted presence, like town centres, empty buildings, all this idea of using studio spaces and things. And whether Veronica could have, more presence in the town, whether the studios could be helped out with the empty buildings, could be the council could be here. If the people in the council can't be the ones to make the decisions about the new rules about business rates, who do we need to talk to? How do we get a buy-in? And we was kind of working out how many years it's been since art was actually funded within education and local, that sort of money really that makes that work. What else have I missed out? So getting more buy-ins for the change. How do you do that? I think that's probably about everything, isn't it? Yeah. Oh.
About crossing the boundaries.
Say a bit more about that.
The idea that perhaps our role as artists is like to be the people that are crossing the boundaries, the binaries in the arguments. Because I mean, you spoke about the fragmentation of discussion, I think, at events that you've been to, and that quite often happens. And maybe the role of the artist is somebody who is quite fluid and open and can actually cross some of these boundaries and keep the conversations open. So that was really one of the things that we discussed.
Yeah, one of the points was about the conference that we had in Dorset when we took the Groundwork exhibition on tour, and it became quite fragmented, and it was almost as if we were all too strong with our firmly held beliefs to actually come together. It was stopping us actually coming together about the thing that really mattered. And that expression about holding your nose, about the things you don't really like, but the bigger picture is the thing that's important. And so that was something to consider.
Thank you very much. Every time I want to say something back, but I'm not. I'm going to save it for later, because there's a lot. I guess it's wonderful. We're here because we're forming a bigger community, and Groundwork Network is trying to make it bigger and make it more public. But I like the idea. I like the weird ones.
So, on our table, we had a very wide-ranging discussion about access and about movement, using rivers alongside rivers, running, skating. Also, we were talking about the old trade routes that linked King's Lynn to other parts of the world. Different ways of people moving through the landscape and how very quickly, when you try and do something that's not along the prescribed routes, you start hitting against the boundaries and these separation. And then we started talking about access and knowledge, and how would people be laying snares if they knew that they were going to be discovered, that those boundaries weren't being respected. So we were talking about, lots of kind of movement through the landscape, and the enforced barriers that are cultural as well as physical, and being an active participant in the landscape, and how to kind of start stepping up to, I can make a difference. And then it got very interesting, because we started going into how people were moving from the landscape, but also how water moves and how land moves and makes new parts of land. It was a very rich conversation.
You can tell this is such a creative community, because all the responses have been so rich and so different.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruth. We had a really great conversation as well. I think we started by talking about rivers and about language, and one of the things that struck us was us talking about Indigenous cultures, and a lot of them actually talking about rivers as living things. And in a lot of language, it's a she, or it's, they are animate in their own way, they are living, they have rights. And we touched a little bit on ceremony that has happened in places to give a river a right. We introduced ourselves, we talked about what our practices were, and kind of, I guess, what brought us to be here. I think we talked about access. So to be a custodian and look after an environment when you can't actually get close to it, where, especially with rivers, so many places are barred to us by private landowners, and that we can't get down to have that relationship with, to see what is happening to a river, that's a really big challenge. We also talked about that we'd been sold quite a fundamental lie that as individuals we can't necessarily make a difference, and that disempowerment is a real challenge for us as practitioners, but also I think wider societally. And we talked about the small acts. So you gave a beautiful example of darning, and what you found by making that small gesture and what that meant to you. And I think that expanded into us talking about individual acts of care that we can take, whether it be for an object or for the environment, and how those small gestures can actually make fundamental differences, and that they're not, there's an energy and a sense of emergency, right? We all know we've got to act and we've got to do so much, and there's not much time, and so sometimes little things can feel like they aren't valid, but actually they're changes of mindset, they're changes of ways we're connecting, and the way we're valuing a resource is maybe to mend, to reuse, to not consume in the way we have been. And then I think one of the things I was feeling was about how do you give that to a wider community? Because we are all coming at this from a point of view of caring very passionately, of practicing and working with this stuff. But how do we take that out? How do we make more people feel that, so that that becomes part of their life and their experience? And how do we take our work into community?
That's a brilliant note to end on. And it would be great if each of you could crystallise what you said into a question that we might, like your thing, your last thing was a question. Let's see what